Hello and welcome, followers of KLWines on Instagram. Today we are going to be talking more great talk about great wine, and I'm incredibly excited to have what I consider one of the preeminent properties in all of California. And so we're going to be joined by the winemaking and vineyard management team of Aron Weinkauf and Corinne Rich, who will be joining us shortly. For those of you who aren't familiar with Spottswoode Winery in Napa Valley in Western St. Helena, shame on you. This is a legendary property of one of the preeminence when we look over it to say Bordeaux and we look at the top cru first growth properties. The equivalency in California would absolutely consider would include Spottswoode, and our guests are joining us now. And let's see if we got this all working out. Spottswoode, and 3, 2, 1, boom! Hey, hello and welcome.
Thank you. How's it going? How are you?
I think I need to adjust the pinch here. There we go. You guys are.
Yeah, we're doing the same on our end.
You look wonderful.
Well, thanks.
I was just starting a little bit of an introduction about Spottswoode for the people tuning in.
Yep.
I think first and foremost, it should always be said that Spottswoode in the history, the pantheon of California winemaking, is one of the premier properties. And if they used French designation, a complete grand cru in the scheme of things. So I got to imagine that you two must feel rather privileged to be working there. And so maybe we could talk a little bit about some backstory and a little bit history about the founding of it a little bit without getting too dry and too long. But with such amazing history, I think we have to touch on that first. So I'll open it up to one of you to give just a little bit of backstory on where Spottswoode came from.
Cool. Well, I'll just start. My name is Aron Weinkauf. I'm Winemaker Vineyard Manager, and yes, this is Corinne Rich, and we are part of the team. There's a couple others here on the production side, but all that said, yeah, the overall property has actually been planted to grapes for just a little over 140 years. And it's gone through, obviously, a whole series of transitions. The property that now includes the winery was a pre-Prohibition winery, and Prohibition was not necessarily kind to it. So when the Novaks moved here in the 70s, there was a lot of work to bring it back up to snuff, and then eventually we were able to buy the property, the few acres here on the other side of Madrona Avenue, where the winery itself, the physical winery itself, sits, and that was restored and basically converted. We started storing our wines there in the late 80s. So before that, it was stored over at Mary's house. And so, yeah, the Novaks, it was started by Mary Novak and then soon handed down to her daughter Beth, and her other daughter Lindy came on board a few years after that. And it's really been the 2/3 of them spearheading this thing since its inception. And it is a beautiful little property right here at the base of the Mayacamas, just right at the bottom of the mountains, so the very start of the Napa Valley bench, and up here in St. Helena, which is about as far north where you have the true benchlands of the Napa Valley.
So my understanding is that you guys the Novaks took ownership of the property back in 72, and were doing more grape growing at the time, but it wasn't until 82 that you guys actually moved into wine production. And at that time, did you start off right into like estate Cabernet? Was it the program similar to what's done now?
That was basically exactly what the program was. Yes, when it was initially started, it was Mary, her husband Jack, and the 5 kids that moved up here, and they started it and ran it as a vineyard for a number of years. Jack suddenly passed away, so then Mary ran it on her own for a number of years after that. And then, yes, as you said, in 1982 was when they started the winery. All of that said, it was they had already, initially it was planted to a lot of the old school Napa varietals, but they had already gone through a series of replants in the 70s, converting most of it to Cab, because by then the industry was already gathering steam, and people like Rick Foreman, who was a neighbor at the time, was very helpful to the family in advising them on what to plant and other things to do. And it was just one of those things where, yeah, very much it was already in the trend. That was already the progression. So yeah, when we first started in '82, it was with that vision of making an estate cab, and then very soon after that, started the Sauvignon Blanc program, which was always Mary's favorite wine. So we had to make a Sauvignon Blanc also.
It's an amazingly beautiful property. I've had the privilege of visiting a few times, though it's been quite a few years. I know it used to be to visit was by appointment only. I would assume that still is true. And if it is true, are you still able to accommodate people during quarantine and the pandemic? Is that something that Spottswoode still does in the circumstance?
They've done a really wonderful job pivoting, obviously, when outdoor tastings have been permitted. Mm-hmm. We're fortunate enough that we have the actual winery offices and winery property, but then we have the estate home as well, which is the one adjacent to the vineyard. It's the beautiful building you see on our labels. And fortunately, we have plenty of outdoor space there, so we've been able to accommodate guests on a limited basis by appointment, either out just on the terrace by the pool, which is not the worst place to taste wine, or on inclement weather days out on the porch.
Yeah, that's important to know that so you do want people to come up, but to be sure, make an appointment first, because I think it's a hot ticket, even still.
Yeah, COVID times or non-COVID times, we're by appointment only. Our use permit being here in the city of St. Helena is still somewhat limited, so the space is tight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally respect that. But people should make the effort if they get up there. So what I think is fascinating about Spottswoode is that when you see so many wineries make so many different types of wines, you guys have built this world-class reputation primarily on one wine, which is the Estate Cabernet, which is continually rated as one of the top wines in the world. A famous wine critic once called it the Chateau Margaux of Napa Valley, which is not a bad comparison, but I think at this point absolutely stands on its own, and maybe Margaux could compare themselves to Spottswoode in some respect. But like you said, there's the Sauvignon Blanc, and then there was the also addition, I don't know, a decade ago of Lyndenhurst. Maybe you can talk through a little bit what your vision for each one of those wines is and how it translates the Spottswoode vision.
For sure. Well, since you touched on it quickly, I'll just say the Lyndenhurst was a Napa Valley cab that we started making in 2002, so a little bit more than 10 years ago. And the initial vision of it was that it was a young vine blend off of the estate, but as it evolved over the years, it became what it is now, where it is just intended to be a blend of Napa Valley vineyards that we source. Some of it still from our own estate and some of it from other properties. But yeah, absolutely, the place was founded on the production of our estate cab. It's a wine that we like to say is always of a time and of a place. St. Helena is one of the hotter areas, so so many decisions, starting with Tony and Soder as the first winemaker moving forward. So many of the things that we do in the vineyard and then in the winery is really about moderating the effects of the heat and the sun here, and really trying to preserve what we think of as the beauty and the nuance, the subtlety of the wine, because we think that's really one of the markers for great wines. And so it's very much kind of that ethos that I think would permutate all of our production efforts, and it's always, it sounds cliche, but we always want the vine to show its best and to show balance, and we always want those wines to absolutely be unique and differentiated from vintage to vintage, but still always with that goal of seeking out the middle point, that balance.
I think
That's one of the beautiful things too about like the estate blending process too, is as we're piecing everything together. It's so fascinating to watch the different blocks and the different parcels of the property fit together like puzzle pieces, where they all have their strengths and they all have the things that maybe they aren't showcasing as beautifully, but when they all come together, it just speaks to the synergy of the whole estate.
Well, I can't show it here. I have it on my computer screen right behind here, is from your last newsletter, which is on your website, is an incredible little drawing of the estate itself, and then all the vineyards, and exactly the multitude of different blocks as to what varietal they're planted to. It's all kind of really tight, but like row, 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 and then it's a whole new block. What distinguishes the change in one block from the next that you would mark it such?
So it's a mixture of, it ultimately boils down to a normal thing. It's a mixture of rootstocks, different clones, and really our efforts, because ultimately when you're growing wine grapes, it's somewhat of a monoculture. It's still vitis vinifera, and so everything that we do is about trying to incorporate the biodiversity, incorporate the natural complexity into our farming practices as much as possible. So we like to not have necessarily the same rootstock next to the same rootstock. So we've gone through and we've broken up our plantings so we have that differentiation. And of course, there's always just the normal efforts of trying to pair rootstock with soil type, because we are at the convergence of two seasonal creeks. So history has created a very dynamic soil pattern within a very small area.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable. Corinne, if I could ask you to talk a little bit about the Sauvignon Blanc. I'm a huge fan of Sauvignon Blanc, and it's almost always my go-to white. When I'm going to have white wine, it's almost always my first thought. But there's such a variety of styles when it comes to Sauvignon Blanc that maybe California isn't thoroughly known for its style, whereas people think of France, where you've got Sancerre, which is that wonderful light, crisp, refreshing kind of bistro style wine. Obviously, it can be a lot more serious than that, but that's the bulk of it. And then you go to New Zealand, they're much more exotic, gooseberry, they kind of explode in the glass. Where do you see Sauvignon Blanc's role in California winemaking, and what is your goal for the Sauvignon Blanc from Spottswoode? What should it be?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a fair amount of historical precedence for Sauvignon Blanc in California. You know, it's had a presence here for quite some time, though maybe it hasn't gotten some of the glitz and the glamour of Chardonnay. And I think it's a grape that can really beautifully showcase, some of the attributes of the climate here. We do experience a lot of heat here in Napa Valley and also adjacent in Sonoma Valley, where some of our fruit comes from for the Sauvignon Blanc. And it's a grape that's able to maintain its acidity, that presents sort of a wider range of layers of fruit flavors and different levels of acidity. And so our goal with the Sauvignon Blanc program is to create a really expressive wine that is just kind of like singing with freshness. And I feel like that's one of the hallmarks of our Sauvignon Blanc, is it's got this like beautiful lifted plush fruit element to it, but always with like such a clean mineral edge to it as well. And we're able to achieve that through a lot of different experimentation through the process of crafting the wine. Obviously, we have a number of different vineyards. We have our own estate vineyard. We get fruit from up on Isles Peak. We get fruit from in Sonoma County as well. And then during the actual fermentation process, we end up doing over 200 individual Sauvignon Blanc fermentations, whether those are in, it is a lot to look after, whether it's in wood barrels. We do stainless steel drums as well, large format wood. We have different concrete eggs as well. And so we give ourselves essentially this very epic toolkit of things that when it comes to the process of creating and blending the wine, we really get to pick and choose our favorite elements and get them to come harmoniously together.
Is there any, does the wine see any oak?
It does, yeah, it certainly does. So of those 200 odd fermentations, a decent percentage of them end up being both neutral and new wood as well.
Yeah,
we typically average about 15% new oak, about 20% used oak, and about 50% plus stainless steel barrels. and those can go up and down depending on the year and the blocks and just how we're reading it and how we want to apply those. And then there's about 5% from the cement eggs.
Yeah, I think that wine comes across not as your just standard kind of porch pounder, simple summer sipper. It's got some gravitas. It's a pretty serious wine, and I personally have found that I would rather drink it 1 to 2 years after release, and I'm sure it can age longer than that. I know most people buy wines and drink them within 45 minutes, and that's great too. But I'd almost say then decant it if you can at home before you're going to have that wine if you're going to drink it young.
Yeah, there's been a lot of the SB vintages where we've when we're pouring them here in the tasting room, we're decanting them at least the morning of, sometimes even before that. But we want them to open up and show well. And it's always that fine line when you're making the wines of having a wine that's immediately presentable, but also a wine that's, whether people are truly collecting or whether they're just, wanting, a little more of a connoisseur flair where they want to age it until they think it's the proper maturity. But trying to find the balance of all of those characteristics sometimes works very easily, and sometimes they conflict a little.
And we try to remind ourselves of that too. Every year when we're starting our Sauvignon Blanc blending process, we'll usually do some sort of vertical retrospective to just sort of remind everybody where we've been and where we've gone and where we're hoping to be.
When I talk to people about drinking white wines, I often tell them, especially substantial ones like that one, is decant it. A lot of people don't think about decanting a young white wine, but I think just the inclusion of oxygen just really kind of wakes it up, and suddenly you're getting a lot more flavors, aromas, and it's not just your very last sip that'll be the best one. It'll maybe happen halfway through the bottle as it's had a chance to kind of come to life. On another related note, I had the great fortune being at a friend's house recently who served the 94 estate cab.
Cool.
Very cool.
Obviously that was a very heralded vintage upon release. Maybe it was a little bit controversial. Some people thought maybe it was a little bit too much of a hot vintage. I do remember when those came out, but the wine was just simply screaming, and I was just overjoyed to get to taste it, especially knowing that we were going to have this chat coming up.
Awesome.
Very cool.
Now, so that kind of predates, I think, both of you, because I think, Aron, you started on with the property in 2006, and Corinne, when did you come on board?
2018.
2018. Oh, you're very fresh here.
The freshest, one might say.
One of the other things that's really important about Spottswoode is their role in Napa Valley and in winemaking is their sort of neighbor and steward to earth and their neighborhood. Let's talk a little bit about your concept of Spottswoode as farmers. I know there's both Demeter certification is important when you talk about Spottswoode, and most recently, I believe you were awarded you became B Corporation certified. Probably, as much as people don't know what Demeter is, I'm sure people know B certification a little bit less. So let's jump into the B certification, because I think that's an incredibly important, relevant topic. So if you can give a little background on that and where you guys are with that today.
Well, I'll quickly kind of give a throwback props to, of course, Beth and her mother. But really all of this started with, Mary and her husband moving up here. They wanted to get away from the city. They wanted to, being folks from Southern California, they wanted, I think Jack had this dream of being a gentleman farmer. And it was one of those things where they moved up and serendipitously stumbled upon Spottswoode. This was something that, Beth is always the first one when she's telling the story to admit the humble beginnings of Spottswoode, because they didn't know what they were doing. They weren't farmers. They didn't come up here with this vision of making, this preeminent wine growing estate in the Napa Valley. It's always grown organically, and to their credit, they've always done so with such humility and such care for their family, their friends, the neighborhood. And so it's really from that, I think, that ultimately you have the growth into all of these other avenues, whether it became, a very much more active role in organics that Mary was immediately on board with, but this was something that Tony had suggested back in 1985 before people knew what organics was. And this was, basically just, again, the start of a very long history of being progressive, of wanting to take care of friends, family, environment, etc. And so it's really stemmed from that we've accomplished and done everything that we've done. Yeah, and I'll just say it started, yes, with organic certification. We started farming organically in '85, certified organic in 1992, which was the first year CCUF was actually actively certifying vineyards in the Napa Valley.
Which year was that? What year was that?
1992, when they first started certifying.
Wow, way
yeah, we were
the vogue.
Yeah, exactly. And so from there, of course, that continued to evolve. We continued to restore the creek beds and the riparian areas in and around the property. Of course, actively, as I talked about earlier, promoting the biodiversity, promoting the complexity of rootstocks, clonal material. And then that evolved into, in 2009, starting to farm biodynamically, which then led us to where we just decided to certify with Demeter this year, but also has led us to participating in 1% for the Planet.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know, it's probably been 5 or 6 years ago that we started participating in that. And then that's just led to a number of the newer projects that we've been doing, and I'm going to let Corinne touch on them because she's been part of a couple of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sort of since then we've also been participating in the International Wineries for Climate Action. Obviously, being passionate environmental stewards is a huge part of that conversation, is climate change and how it's impacting us and how we can sort of slow its impacts. We've also recently gotten our B-Corp certification, as you alluded to as well. We're working on a zero waste certification. And I sort of think of each one of these certifications is another level of trying to kind of put our money where our mouth is, so to speak, where environmental stewardship is something that's clearly very important to us. But a lot of these certifications ask us to then go one step further. So yes, we're farming sustainably. We're thinking about our farm as an ecosystem and the inputs and the outputs. But then a lot of these things start to ask, well, how are you treating your people? What are your practices like? How do you support your employees? How do you sort of support their comfort in a more sustainable workspace for them? And how do we all participate in that as well? And I think those are really important questions to interrogate, because you can be a really thoughtful farmer, but if that's not proliferating down to the way that you work with and treat your team and other aspects of your business, then it kind of just ends up being isolated in this one system.
It's really tough. Go ahead.
No, I was just following the B-Corp thing now, because I was up in Oregon last year, probably January, before things shut down, and a lot of the wineries were talking up the concept of the B-Corp very much, and that was kind of the first I started really hearing about it. And I love that whole notion. I went to their website and read up a little bit there as well, but that whole notion of benefiting the stakeholders, not just the shareholders, and that when you guys are running the property, everything you do, you have to consider the impact on workers, customers, suppliers, community, and environment. So it kind of turns a business into not just a money-making tool, but a force for good. And I think that's an amazing virtue, and really speaks highly for who you guys are.
Yeah, and it was funny because the process again was very organic. We had been doing a lot of these things naturally, and as these certifications or agencies came about, we would see how well they aligned with our ethos and our efforts, and pursue that. And yeah, when you see the complexities of them, how stringent some of them are, the standards to demonstrate B Corp status were considerable. And it's really fascinating too, because you forget the other half of it is, ultimately there has to be a metrics. You have to be able to monitor these things from year to year, and you have to be, in pursuing the actual certifications, you have to demonstrate them and prove them. And so it's, it forces you to walk a more steady line, basically.
Yeah, and also too, the B-Corp is not something specific to wineries, but wineries seem to have jumped all over this. And I think our friends in Oregon were telling me that they were, like Oregon wineries was one of the greatest density of, and of course, Tony's up there, as you talked about Tony Soda earlier.
Yep.
One of the greatest percentages of density of certification of that is with Oregon wineries. And clearly that's going up and down the West Coast. So it's interesting to see, and I think it makes me proud to be in this industry, that it's wineries by large part that have jumped on this and seen its benefit.
Yeah, it's been really fascinating because, you know, those trends tended to hold true with organics. You know, there's obviously been a big push for more organic vegetables in the last 10 years, and as some of the bigger companies came on board with larger organic selections. But it was always fascinating because the wine industry has often been one of the more progressive industries in all of these environmental concerns. So it absolutely does speak highly to just to everyone's efforts and where the mindset is of a lot of these people.
And I feel like part of that too is the wine industry is at this really interesting intersection where, like, we are very much agriculture. We are farming. We are growing an agricultural product. But our agricultural product in some regions, not all regions, has an incredibly high dollar value, right? And so the ability of a lot of like smaller wineries who are still doing pretty well economically to then pursue these certifications and have the manpower to do it and things like that is, I think, greater probably in the wine industry than in some other ag industries.
Very impressive. Hey, how about, it looks like you've got like $1 million worth of wine behind you there. Could you hold up one of the labels to up closer up to the camera? I'm sitting at the home office, so I don't have any Spottswoode here, unfortunately, at the moment. But I think people would like to just see the label a little bit up closer.
Yeah, so that was an old vertical tasting from a few months ago that we had done, 1999 through 2018. Oh, but here is the current label.
And so so we've currently got that in stock, and that vintage is
the 2017.
17, and the Lyndenhurst, is that also the same vintage on Lyndenhurst?
Yes, it should be the same vintage on the Lyndenhurst.
And the Sauvignon Blanc?
And this is our Lyndenhurst label, subtly different from the estate label.
Yep.
And the Sauvignon Blanc label.
Oh man, I'd like to have a glass of that right now.
Yeah, I wish we could teleport it, because there's about half a bottle sitting here that could have your name on it.
So, in doing your comparative tasting, which vintages stood out for you guys?
Oh man, that's
it's so fascinating. I feel like when we do our vertical, without fail, the 2011 is such a fascinating wine to circle back to, because, you know, that was such a cooler vintage where some people would venture to call it an atypical vintage, but that is always a staff favorite. Sort of the restraint and the beautiful like earthiness that it shows as it's developed has always been really beloved by us.
I totally believe that, because I know over the years selling Cabernet, like vintages like 2003, 2011, 2013, not 13, but like 2011, that were slightly cooler. There was some rain. And I remember telling customers, you got to buy these wines. They're like, yeah, but they don't have the best reviews I've ever seen. I go, just wait 5 to 7 years, taste it. And I've had customers call me up and say, like, I'm glad you talked me into that, because that wine's showing amazing right now. And you could drink them sooner, and they're so good.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, what's the oldest Sauvignon Blanc that you guys have tasted? How long will that hold up if you push it?
I've tasted back like 99s, 2001s, and about the oldest I've tasted them is usually right around 10 years, and they're excellent. I mean, you were talking about it earlier. It's a wine that absolutely, if you want to give it the time and can afford to give it the time, they can still be tremendous with, you know, just an extra year or even 10 years, and just the nuances of them can be great. I would probably not age the warmest vintages quite as long. That's just kind of my opinion. Yeah,
no, that makes good sense. But the wines truly do evolve. Very few wines do evolve. Spottswoode wines do. And, looking at the lineup you've got there and knowing what I had out of that 94 recently, a testament that these are really some of the finest in all of California. You have a whole other generation of young people coming up and drinking wines, and they're not always looking at sort of like their mom and dad's Cabernet. And so that's why I find it's important to let's never lose sight of really the history, and this is the real deal. This isn't somebody who came along and said, hey, I'm going to make a super expensive, highly rated Cabernet. Like, you guys are just historical and legendary and deserve to be in everyone's sort of wine repertoire, so to speak. What I'm curious right now, though, is, so we're February. What's going on at the winery, and what are you guys up to when you're not hosting IG live video chats?
Oh God, yeah. No, we've been pretty. This is the part of the job that I think everybody's jealous of. We've been pretty busy tasting and blending for the last month. There's the 2020 Sauvignon Blanc is basically, we're going to start laying down barrels and start racking it next week. So it's going to be going to tank pretty quickly. So there's a lot of work to try to get that blend together and figure out which of those 220 barrels are going into the big blend. And then of course, the progression with the reds is just, it's constant. We're constantly monitoring the wines, but we're also tasting and constantly building our image of how the wines are going to pair up, what the vintage is going to look like. And so, yeah, that's been the biggest part of it. This time of year, it's also always a good part. People want to, hold classes, give seminars, interviews, etc. during the downtime. So it's been amazingly busy still on this side of things.
Corinne, what's your background before coming over to Spottswoode? Clearly they wouldn't have gotten you on board if you didn't have a pretty impressive resume.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly feel like I kind of won the lottery getting this job. But prior to Spottswoode, I had just finished up my master's degree at UC Davis in viticulture and enology, and I'd worked a number of harvests all over the U.S. and had traveled abroad a couple of times. Most recently, prior to Spottswoode, I had been up at Della Valle Vineyards on Pritchard Hill, and that was of how I got connected in with the team here.
That's amazing. And so, oh boy, I totally lost that train of thought there. But so what is it about now working at Spottswoode that maybe, I mean, if you came from Della Valle, that's also a pretty top tier winery, and I'm sure they're very exacting in everything they do. So maybe that wasn't a huge switch coming to Spottswoode, but are there things that you've noticed that put different demands on your skill sets now that you're there?
Certainly, there have definitely been some really cool challenges. I know I've gotten to spend a lot more time in the vineyard here, which has been just such an amazing experience, trying to absorb all of that information and knowledge and sort of see how that proliferates into everything we do in the winery and on and on. And I think the thing that's the most different about Spottswoode to anywhere I've worked is it is undeniably a very special place in terms of the way that we as a team all work together and appreciate one another, and sort of the way that we're asked to work in so many different aspects of the winery and the vineyard. And it really does feel like this way of integrating everything together in this sort of synergy that we all have, getting to be in so many spaces together, investing in all the different aspects of the winemaking process.
And I was surprised. I think Aron told me that the entire production team is like 8 people.
Yeah, there's 9 of us all together that do all of the vineyard and winery work, and we're constantly going back and forth between the two.
That's amazing. Wow. I don't want to tie up any more of your time. If there's anything else you want to throw in that you think we should have touched on, feel free to. But otherwise, I'd be happy to let you guys get back to your day jobs.
Well, I think it's been great. I mean, I appreciate, of course, all of your contributions and in the questions and your background knowledge, and of course, and having worked with the brand forever, highly appreciative. And then, of course, the entire KNL team also. It's you guys are top notch. So we thank you, and at the same time, hope everybody, as you said, gets to know and does enjoy their Spottswoode.
Yeah, no, listen, it's our privilege.
Cool. Well, ours too. So thank you very much. And yeah, we appreciate the time.
Thanks so much.
Be well, be safe. Great chatting with you. And next time I hope to see you up in Napa Valley itself.
Thank you. Sounds
Thank you.
great.
Likewise.
Take care.
Cheers.